Is it appear for you?
Yes, it's great. Thank you very much. So,
Hi, Nythamar. Thanks a lot for being here. As we said yesterday, we have a very unfortunate event. Nythamar's mother died. And first of all, I think this is an extreme level of commitment to be here in such a situation. I want to express our deepest sympathy, our condolences, and we are real friend more than just a colleague. So we are here with the bottom of our hearts, supporting you in this difficult moment. And thanks a lot to be present despite such an unfortunate event. Thanks a lot, Nythamar. A big round of applause for the commitment, seriously of Nythamar Oliveira.
Thank you very much, Gabriel. It's a great pleasure to be here again. I apologize that I wasn't able to be taking part in the discussions because I was really involved with this whole thing of this circumstance. But I'm very grateful to Gabriel Mogarabi and to all my colleagues and friends from the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, and congratulate you for putting up together this big conference. So I'll go straight to my presentation. I'm basically recasting or trying to recast the compatibilist decision-making thesis, even though I know that this is quite a challenge for anyone here, as we can infer from all the different presentations going in one direction or another. There have been a few publications related to this topic. Basically, I've been assuming that there has been a neuroscientific turn in moral philosophy and social psychology. And I've been trying to see how neurophilosophy or the philosophy of neuroscience may shed light on the normative problems raised by naturalistic projects of ethical and social research, especially at the articulation between the neurobiological evolution of human species and the social and historic evolution of society and social groups. By taking a critical theoretical approach to both naturalism and normative theories, I've been arguing that there has been a phenomenological deficit in both naturalism and normative theories of self, free will, and agency, including critical theory. I'm thus proposing a mitigated version of social constructivism or social constructionism, if you will, that combines a normative reconstruction of critical theory with non-reductive neurophilosophical models of the social brain programs. We've been carrying on this research basically at the Brain Institute as an interdisciplinary research, starting from the idea of a naturalizing social epistemology. And after the experiments with neural networks leading to machine learning systems and engineering in artificial intelligence, we can tell that AI has become the new hype in town following the neural hype. Basically, I'll just go through this abstract to give you an idea of the scope of this research. Since the times of Hobbes, Spinoza, and Kant, philosophers have been trying to make sense of compatibilism, broadly understood as the belief that free will, entailing moral responsibility and causal determinism, are mutually compatible, and that it is possible to believe in both without being logically inconsistent. This metaphysical thesis has been recast nowadays as the compatibilist decision-making thesis, supported by neuroscientific experiments and findings. For instance, following Shedlin and Roski's, I'd like to argue that the neural mechanisms that underlie decision-making might help us not only distinguish agents from each other, as they did in their experiment, but also realize that there are multiple agential states conditioned by physical, biochemical, and social states, allow indeed for various aspects of decision-making process that could bridge the neurobiology of decision-making and the philosophical problems in ethics and metaphysics. By revisiting this compatibilist thesis, I aim to fill in what I've been dubbing the phenomenological deficit of normativity and naturalism, avoiding both normativism in moral philosophy and metaphysics and reductionist approaches to neuroscience, human nature, and the natural science. Insofar as it unveils the reducibility of first-person attitudinal accounts, including moral beliefs and belief in free will, the compatibilist decision-making thesis, thus recast, allows for justifying inactive, embodied, and situated approaches to neuroscience and artificial intelligence within a Spinozan-inspired supervenience monism in a Rossian-like wide reflective equilibrium without any specific substantive commitment to moral, metaphysical, or comprehensive doctrines overall. So this is part of, it's actually a spin-off of this ongoing project in ethics of artificial intelligence, which itself is already continuing other research in neuroethics, especially with Facebook users that was carried out a few years ago. And we had a few events leading from bioethics towards neuroethics and AI ethics. And this following week, we'll have another edition of our international colloquium on these very subjects. And we have this good partnership with Professor Bograbi and our colleagues at the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, especially the ones that are also doing research for the AI and Robotics Ethics Society, IRIS, which we also have a chapter in Brazil. Basically, the idea here is that we are addressing the phenomenological deficit without subscribing to reductionist readings of naturalism and normativism, as I said. And then these inactivist approaches with its focus on social cognition is situated within an organism's embodied interactions might offer a holistic framework for understanding moral decision-making as emerging from dynamic interplays between neural process, bodily states, and environmental affordance. So my working hypothesis is trying to verify how we could recast this idea of a social constructionism in a neuroethics of decision-making process through a mitigated social constructivism, avoiding the reductionist views on both sides of the spectrum. We can think here that in the age of technological advancements in AI systems, it's very interesting to see how developers, when they're working with neural networks and machine learning, deep learning, algorithmic coding, that they are facing decision-making process. And of course, the way it's usually assumed that we just resort to some kind of a utilitarian model of moral reasoning and apply to AI. But this is precisely what's also at stake, and also things relating to the social context in shaping ethical norms and values. This is part of our ongoing research. might go ahead. Just to keep in mind that Patricia Churchland, Adina Roskis, and Martha Farah have been acclaimed as the founding women of neuroethics in the 21st century, as they move towards this neuroscientific approach to moral problems, not only in terms of applied ethics, but even metaphysical terms, as we find in metaethics. So in this essay that I mentioned, Professor Roskis, in her contribution, goes on to say that the neurobiology of decision-making does not threaten belief in freedom because it discloses the causes of action. Rather, the neurobiology of decision-making sheds light on the mechanisms that might lead an agent to make one choice in circumstance that might lead to another. And even very similar agents to choose differently. We thus offer a glimpse of an aspect of compatibilism that does not address the compatibility of freedom with determinism per se, but instead addresses the compatibilism of responsibility with neurobiology and mechanism. As we've seen in many presentations here, there is a way of making this distinction between free will problems and the metaphysical and moral problems involved in the question of responsibility, precisely because of agency. By showing how choices are made, the neurobiology does not dismiss choice as illusory, but rather as highlights the agent's capacity to choose. So this is something we can explore more during the debate. Basically, when we do neuro imaging, we are measuring brain activity by detecting changes associated with blood flow, for instance, for fMRI. And that's what we did in our experiments with reason and emotion in social relations. And as we move a step forward towards the social brain, bringing in the sociality inherent in social cognition. For instance, when you have these two different models, one that is considered to be more impersonal, such as the switch dilemma experiment, even though it's the same calculus that's involved, at least in terms of saving 5 lives to the detriment of one person being killed. In the second scenario, like the footbridge dilemma, we have a more personal approach to agency, and therefore, in the different versions of Joshua Green's trolley problem relating to moral dilemmas, it might lead to different conclusions. So that's why metaethics has also been engaged in this interlocution with bioethics and neuroethics, and now with ethics of AI, because decision-making process, of course, tend to be more or less explicit vis-a-vis selfhood, or the way agency is implying some subjective states. Also, when we speak of phenomenal consciousness, we think of qualia, or the reducibility of this phenomenality of aboutness of a first person's intentions, as we just heard in Professor Gilberto Gomez's presentation. But also when we think of the different ways that we try to come up with different articulations, for instance, of beliefs and desires, when you think of a propositional attitudes. And of course, if you think of eliminativism, as in the Churchland's proposal for physicalism or naturalism, it's a question of getting away or moving away from folk psychology in accounts of a subjectivity towards third personal accounts. So we had different experiments. I won't go into detail, but one of them was to produce this data set that has been very much used now with AI, but here including fMRI and MRI data from brain imaging studies of children with developmental dyslexia. For instance, it was one of the projects that we carried out at the Brain Institute. Pre-adolescents and exposure to violence, bilingual speakers of a minority language, and young adults in the use of social media. So just as we did with Facebook users, we also did, we had some 900 subjects. Then we had to eliminate the ones that were using Facebook too much, let's say millennials and generations Y and Z, as opposed to people that had only, every now and then they would check their Facebook. So we tried to come up with a more representative sample of between 250 300 subjects. Same thing was done with these developmental dyslexia in people with different forms of development, cognitive development, especially for reading, brain imaging data for children aged 8 to 11 years, longitudinal study of reading development in children, and so forth. We did the same thing for bilinguals. In Rio Grande do Sul, we have people who learned German even before learning Portuguese. We talk about this Hundsrikisch, it's like a Plattdeutsch in these German Brazilian communities. We had dyslexic bilinguals, we had brain and social media, so we had all different kinds of combinations. And this, of course, it's not to say that we're going to put in the same way that we had pre-modern, let's say, conceptions of metaphysics when we think of the origin of these free will debates around Erasmus' publication, for instance, of this opus entitled De Libero Arbitrio, and then Luther's response, De Servo Arbitrio. Of course, this would be different perspectives in terms of approach to the Hebrew Bible, right? But also relating to the interpretation in the New Testament regarding this very problem in so-called Old Testament. But the interesting thing when we revisit theological discussions is that starting with Hobbes, we had this attempt to come up with a mechanistic understanding of the thing, and that's how determinism ends up being formulated in modern terms. But it's still a very atomistic model in Thomas Hobbes. Someone like Spinoza is going to go a step further in his development of a monist conception of this compatibility thesis. And of course, Immanuel Kant has a different transcendental proposal in terms of trying to tackle this problem, opposing causal determinism to free will. So in these experiments, we kept in mind that we are revisiting these problems, as I said, and the compatibility solution is, of course, very complex, as I did my presentation in this event a couple of years ago. The idea is that we can see something like a Moore's paradox that would be like saying that necessitarianism is true, determinism is true, but I do not believe it. So this would be a way of thinking that Spinoza is proposing something like this. In Antonio Damasio's formulation, Even Spinoza's conception of conatos implies that the living organism is constructed so as to maintain the coherence of its structures and functions against numerous life-threatening odds. So the conatos subsumes both the impetus for self-preservation in face of danger and opportunities and the myriad actions of self-preservation that hold the parts of a body together. But still, this allows for an idea of a free will that, even though it seems to be in direct conflict with an ethical system in which human beings decide to behave in a particular way as opposed to a causal determinism, doesn't mean that you cannot make choice. It became much more complex. Even by reading Spinoza's Ethics, we can see that he's not endorsing one form of teleological models of ethics or utilitarian or what would be later known as deontological model, Kant. But his idea is that freedom is not the kind usually contemplated in discussions of free will, but something far more radical, a reduction of dependencies on the object emotional needs that enslave us. And therefore, all the different models that were proposed would be under review and criticized, culminating with a very robust proposal, as we found in Derek Parfit's 3 volumes on what matters. Normativity is really what matters. And yet, I'd like to challenge these non-naturalist, cognitivist defense of normative facts as proposed by Parfit, precisely because as we review our moral judgments in a wide reflective equilibrium, it's not only the moral judgments as such, but we are also revisiting theories of so-called human nature, not only in terms of a social cognition, but theories of meaning, different conceptions of interpretation, leading all the way to feminist and more recent contributions to theories of subjectivity. And that's how, in our own research on artificial intelligence, we can see that the very topics that are part of 2 basic experiments, one of them leading to the construction of a responsible AI platform in order to avoid, for instance, racial discrimination, sexist biases, and so forth, which, of course, are things that result from human contributions in terms of different conceptions of selfhood and agency. But the very idea of safety and ethics emerge as areas of research that also relate to this broader institutional understanding of sociality. For instance, when we talk about governance and we are dealing with legislation of AI. That's why all these different areas, they end up intersecting each other, and that's why we end up with some view of intersectionality in our proposal of egalitarianism in AI ethics and the very understanding of AI governance. We understand that this very idea of a technoscience has been developed since Bachelard in the beginning of last century was thinking of a quantum physics as a paradigm that was being benefited from the findings of physics. This recent movie, Oscar-winning Oppenheimer, was a very interesting example of these problems in applied ethics. But because technoscience and these technological contributions were decisive for the very development of scientific theories, and especially with computer science, this was the case when we think of the punched card that was used like 40 years ago. I myself used to work with a mainframe IBM 4341 machine that was much less capable than any smartphone that we are using today. People say that even computers from 15 years ago were much less capable than most smartphones we use today. So this means that the questions like raised by Turing in the 50s, can a machine think? A computer passed the test, for instance, the Turing test, if a human interrogator, after posing some written questions, cannot tell whether the written response comes from a person or from a computer. So precisely, if you wanna say that the determinist horn of the dilemma would be on the computer, and the person is precisely what you assign free will or agency or moral responsibility, you see that now with AI, everything has become more problematic because the computer can reach this capability of natural language, knowledge representation, automated reasoning, and machine learning. So in Spinoza's terminology, we can even think of humans as spiritual automata, right? But we can think of different philosophers at different times, so Napier, Pascal, Leibniz, Babbage, and finally Alonso Church, last century, contributed to these discussions in the philosophy of artificial intelligence, starting with the very question of AI, which has been revisited by Aries at our Catholic University in Porto Alegre, but also at the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro. And with these events, we bring together people from different countries discussing the same problem, the same normative challenges coming from new information technologies, especially on a global level. We have to distinguish between what John Searle called weak AI, the idea that AI machines could act as if they were intelligent, and strong AI, the claim that machines that do this are actually consciously thinking and not just simulating thinking. Because in this case, it would be very easy to say, well, you are already making a case for determinism, right? If you are assigning to something very similar to human agency when you say that strong AA is postulated for to account for human agency. But we can keep these separate and think that the ethics of AI emerged as a field that has been characterized by normative questions regarding the apparently infinite and unpredictable potential of a strong artificial intelligence challenging human control of machine learning algorithms and processes. So the idea here is that when we are dealing with AI ethics, we might think of ethical issues that arise with AI systems, both as objects and as subjects. Therefore, that's why this interplay of third person stance and first person accounts as in a phenomenological, irreducible account for narratives of justification for action, especially I think in terms of normative justification or thinking of agency, and especially resorting to ideas like intentionality when you're talking about agency. We cannot expect that an AI is going to develop moral preference simply because of its intelligence, right? So we have here what Nick Bostrom called the orthogonality thesis, combined with different uh, theses that we just mentioned a couple of slides. It's important to recall that from Kasparov's being beat by Deep Blue in the late decades of the past century, and the deep learning developed by Google beating the greatest masters of Go 20 years later, we have a tremendous exponential revolution because deep learning wasn't present in the first experiments with supercomputers. Same thing must be said about robots. We all may think of oldies like Lost in Space. I used to see this, to watch this in black and white TV in the 70s in Brazil. But the idea of a robot here, even as we think of Isaac Asimov's iRobots, three laws of robotics. The first law is the same one still revisited when we are talking about AI ethics, namely that a robot may not injure a human being or through inaction allow a human being to come to harm. So when you have Luciano Floridi, for instance, revisiting the four principles of bioethics, beneficence, non-maleficence, autonomy, and justice, by adding transparency, safety, privacy, responsibility, and especially explicability, interpretability when thinking of the black box phenomena, we see that these are very sophisticated ways of dealing with more or less the same basic normative challenge. And again, we can think of another popular artifact as 2001, A Space Odyssey. I myself saw this movie in the late 60s as a kid. And as we review this story or the whole thing of the protagonism assigned to a supercomputer, in this case, a Hall, we see it's basically the problem of the sorcerer's apprentice, as pointed out by Eliezer Yudkowsky. Basically, that if we end up this human supervision, anything anything can go in an unpredictable, dangerous, apocalyptic direction, right? And this is precisely what the orthogonality thesis might help us keep in mind, that we have to bring in the human interference or the human brain machine interface, as is talked about. Again, the instrumental convergence within autonomously pursued goal systems for the idea of a cognitive enhancement. These are all bound together with the idea of I'm just finishing here because I realize I'm running out of time. So even when we have these neural networks that closely mimic the olfactory circuits, and we have artificial neural networks taking on simple other classification tasks, we shouldn't be surprised to see that it's replicating biology strategy so faithfully, right? But the philosophical problem here must be revisited on both sides of this uh, uh, so-called pickle, that when you think of the machine doing the simulation, we have to revisit also our very conceptions of a free will in agency. This is probably what Professor Savulescu was trying to do with his understanding of a cognitive enhancement, and the whole thing with different conceptions of moral theories. And I think that Patricia Churtland contributed in a very decisive way to our understanding of neuroethics in what would be a neuroscientific approach to moral philosophical problems, just as Damasio, Gazzaniga, people in different areas did the same thing. So thank you very much. And I'm open to engage in discussion if anyone wants to bring in questions, comments. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Nythamar. So yeah, we have a question here from Renato.
So thank you, Professor Nythamar, for your talk. My condolences, first of all. I'd like to ask you, how do you see this this movement to make laws about AI and also about neuroscience in Brazil and all over the world? Because, you know, I know that you are very much interested in this normativity side of the thing, and that interests me a lot. So how do you see this whole other normative field on AI and neuroscience also?
Thank you very much, Renato. Yes, of course, we have some people that tend to go in a very undesirable direction, I would say. People who think that we need very strict regulations. But on the other hand, we also see people going another direction, which could be very dangerous, especially libertarians, let's say. Usually, it's the same thing we have with, as you pointed out in your comment, with neuroethics, the neuroethics of cognitive enhancement, right? Usually libertarians, they would say, well, no, it's up to each individual to just do whatever they want to do because everyone is equally free in this sense. And I think this is flawed. It's a flawed reasoning because we are not as free as people want to assume. We all have been very conditioned, not only neurobiologically in terms of our brain structure, but thinking especially in terms of social cultural conditioning. But on the other hand, I agree with people that say that, well, it would be very dangerous if you have more, let's say, leftist people who would like to have strict regulations prohibiting innovation and stuff like that. So I would say that as far as I can tell, in one of our meta-analyses, used over 200 studies. You know, it's been published by Patterns, which is one of the top tier review journals of computer and experiments with AI. But our conclusion is that we don't have too many interesting documents to follow apart from the European Union, as you know yourself. European Union discussions and documents, they seem to be the ones that really have been used more in terms of trying to strike a balance between an exaggerated libertarian idea that we are totally free and other views that tend to subscribe to some kind of a social engineering, since they think that one way or another we're going to be socially conditioned anyways. Right? So in my view, my only criticism I would raise in our Brazilian scenario is that we need more public debates. Sometimes I'm afraid that some people think that juridical, legal scholars are the ones that are going to decide this, or someone in the Supreme Court. I think that this is misleading because I understand that all segments of society should be involved. So in our case, with our ongoing experiment, as I mentioned here, we have many Black women and people who come from very poor backgrounds. Our idea is precisely to promote social inclusion of gender and race also through digital inclusion. So digital education is a powerful tool for all of us in Brazil to have more social inclusion, since in our country, education does not seem to be a priority for most politicians. So I'm very glad you brought this issue, Renato, because I tend to agree with you that we are still in the process of carrying on these discussions in the public sphere. Thank you very much.
Perfect. So, Gilberto, if you want to talk, I think you're allowed to. You can unmute yourself. You're still muted. You have to press the mute button. We still can't hear you. Let me There we go.
Yes, now it's okay.
Okay.
Well, in fact, I don't have a question. I just want to congratulate Nythamar for this very interesting, intelligent, informed talk. And I would just like to say that a concept of bounded free will would perhaps be relevant to all that you said. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gilberto. I really enjoyed your presentation too.
Great. So do we have any further questions? Nope. Okay.
Well, if we don't have any further questions, I just want to express as the leader of this group, express our collective condolences and to express our deepest sympathy and to thank you to be such a good professional, so committed that even in this very sad moment, you are here present, gave a very clear, brilliant talk. So I will request from the audience a big round of applause for Mr. Nythamar Oliveira. Thanks a lot, my friend.
Thank you, Gabriel. Thank you, everyone.